What a family, as Saul was saying, BIF is. At 24 hours, we're a family. Is that crazy or what? It's absolutely amazing. And the magic of that is something that interests me tremendously. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. In fact, I don't know if you've had the experience where you plan a speech, someone gets up before you and says everything you're going to say. I'm afraid that's happened, so I'm going to say just like he said, just like she said, a little bit today. I'm going to begin back in 1974 when I went to a symposium on meditation. I was just becoming interested in meditation at the time. And the place was filled. It was many people was here, maybe more than that. And this man was on the stage, a Roshi who had arrived from Japan not too long before. And he was sitting on the stage in this wooden sort of banker's chair. And with one leg tucked underneath. And when he was introduced, he unfolded himself and he walked up to the front of the stage, and he looked out, and he saw that there was a glass of water, and he started to reach for that glass of water, and his hand went out impossibly slowly and picked up that glass of water, and he brought it to his lips, and he put it back, and he wiped his lip, put his hands down. And he looked up and you could hear a pin drop. And he said, I stand before you, a stranger, coming from a long way away from a foreign country. I don't look like any of you. I have these robes on, very different. I'm a stranger to all of you, and sitting so uncomfortably in a way I'm unaccustomed, I feel a stranger to myself. And then I remember that I bring my home with me in my heart. And so from there, let me welcome all of you. And I will never forget the transformation that happened for all of us in that room, going from pitying the poor stranger to feeling strangers ourselves, and then all of us welcomed into the homes in our hearts. That transformation stayed with me, and Chris was saying yesterday about the things that happen to you during the course of your life inform, of course, what happens later, and you don't realize what those seeds were that were planted and then come to fruition later on. That was certainly one of the things that affected me. So it was clear that this was sort of an overarching theme here, that how we are matters, and all of us here know that, but we don't often realize how it really impacts things. And I want to go a little deeper into that, and this is the only PowerPoint-ish part of this talk. But there's sort of three pieces to it as far as I've experienced it over the years, and the first one is how we are, of course, matters. But we so are often taken by what the results are going to be, and we get distracted by what it's going to become, particularly as architects. We're all focused on this thing that we're going to make. In fact, how we are at the moment is what creates this building, or whatever it is we're all of us trying to do. The second piece is that we have a responsibility. And it is a pretty simple one. It's that we have a lot to give. So we have our ability to respond. We need to bring our best selves. And as we go forward, and I think all of you realize this, there is no audience. I mean, all of you here are implicated. We're all needed in a certain way. So that's extremely important. And the third thing, which Saul touched upon this morning, is the fact that informs the first two things, which if we look at them as questions, how am I? Who am I? And what is my part? What is my responsibility? What is needed? We have to admit that we don't know. And that question what is it, can animate how we make decisions. And that space of not knowing is extremely important. So just a little bit about myself, and really just a little bit. It took a circuitous path to get me to architecture school. This is the first time that Roy Rogers and Karl Marx have appeared together on the same screen. This is your life, Karl and Roy. Eventually, I made it down to the lower right-hand corner there to architecture, and went to work for went to architecture school, went to work for a few years, and then my wife had a brilliant idea in 1980, which I thought was a bad idea because I said I have a career, and of course I had no career at that point. I was only started. She said, let's move to Paris for a year. Let's save up, move to Paris for a year, because after we have children, God knows we won't be able to go to the movies, which of course she was right about that. She also made me promise to say that she's changed her hairstyle since then. She wanted to make sure that I said this, so I've covered that base. And what happened was completely unexpected. It entirely changed my life. I thought I was going to go over there and draw buildings and get interested in architecture. In fact, I started drawing people and drawing sculptures, and ended up living at this guy's house all summer long in 1980. This guy is Auguste Rodin. And at the time, his museum, which you try to go there now, of course it's impossible, there's so many people. Then I could stand in front of these incredible sculptures and draw them all day long. I did that all the summer. I begged my way into the École des Beaux-Arts to the atelier of the last great professor of figurative sculpture at the École des Beaux-Arts, Maurice Kalka. And he gave me a great gift. He walked over to me as I was just beginning. And I was squeezing this clay, which is very pleasurable, but I hadn't a clue what I was doing. And he came over and he said, "How old are you?" Of course, I thought, well, I've been to architecture school. I've worked for 3 years. I'm 10 years older than your oldest student. And I said, 32. And he said, "Good. You know nothing." That was an incredible gift. It opened a space where all the architecture of Paris flowed in a way that could never have before. What little I knew about architecture, and I mean it was really little, took up in a tremendous amount of space. It's amazing how a teeny bit of knowledge can take up a lot of space. Well, he just cleared the whole thing out, and one of the things that came in were the sculptures that were on the buildings itself. And so I went out into the streets and began drawing it. And this one little vein were these gargoyles. And I drew them, and I drew them, and I drew them, and I drew them, and I drew some more of them, and I drew a lot of them, obviously. And I came back to the United States after that year saying, great, I'm going to put sculpture into architecture. It seemed obvious to me. Now, had I done any market research into this, I would have realized this was really a bad business proposition. But in fact, I was part of a current that went back a really long way of art and architecture. And this is my own little diagram of how I see it. So, 42,000 years of art, and 80 years without any. So what is that excess capacity that Robin was talking about yesterday? I got 80 years of excess capacity I'm working on. So I began a firm where we started, there were some crazy people. Actually, architects don't do market research, or they wouldn't get into architecture. So a bunch of other people, wonderfully creative people, we started doing this. It began small. This was for a friend of mine who's a cartoonist who makes these characters. Then on to a rock and roller, English rock and roller, who loved Robert Johnson for his house, which we did. And then we got slightly larger and did more, did lots all over the place, and finally ending up with 2 buildings at the University of Connecticut with about 3 football fields of sculpture. So we've done a lot of sculpture, and the obvious repository of sculpture is in schools. And that was a wonderful joy for us to sort of discover this. And this was the very first school that we did in 1996. Now, New Haven was beginning a program of schools that eventually became about a $1.5 billion plan. And we applied for this job, even though we clearly didn't know. I mean, we'd never done a school before. However, we went around to every school in New Haven, and we talked to everyone from the maintenance people to the principals, and arrived at the interview as a real outsider. And it was clear that we knew more about the schools than anyone who was interviewing us. And we got this job, much to the amazement of our competition, I have to say, and went into the community. And again, we had to admit that we did not know what they wanted. Now, incredibly, they'd never been asked. Amazingly enough, they'd never been asked. So it was a wonderful process of getting not only the neighbors around this school, but also the children. We asked the kindergartners to draw pictures of the schools they wanted to see. We had them all over our office. We asked alumni of the elementary school who was there before to come. And we began this develop a process that became the blueprint for all the subsequent schools for the last 20 years. We're doing the last one right now. So one of the components of this, which everybody knows, and John and I were just talking about collaboration, right, is obviously this. We suck at this. I have to say, just like we suck at collaboration, right? I mean, yeah. So you have to start with that we actually don't listen. And all of you are out there, and I see that guy back there, and he's thinking, geez, when is he going to finish? You know, I really like that Danny Shea. When is she coming back on again? You know, so that we don't listen. And we began to realize that we had to practice this. We had to practice listening. And so, coincidentally, in 1996, I met this man. And you can see by his face how he listens. William Maxwell was the fiction editor of The New Yorker for 40 years, and he was the mentor to, I would say, all the great writers of the 20th century, the latter part of the 20th century, and wrote some wonderful books himself. Through a series of coincidences, I was able to have lunch with this man every year for 5 years, at the same time, the same place, the same restaurant, the same table, and very often the same dessert. Il flottant. He loved il flottant. And he taught me and my friend Eric, who went with me, about compassionate listening. Not listening from up here, but listening from here. So from 1996 on, for the next 17 years, we did a lot of schools. And we learned a lot about how to make schools. And in every one of them, there was a process that included all sorts of things. Those girls are jumping up, by the way, in front of a mural that they made. For a school, and the kids who were involved, we started a program called Kids Build, which included the kids in the construction process, took them out to the schools and everything else. Well, all that experience did not prepare us for this. And I have to say, we didn't think we could do it, for all the obvious reasons. And we knew we didn't know what was needed. However, we felt that there was a possibility of creating a process where that need could emerge. But we didn't know what it was, and we were struggling with this, and we got to the interviews, and Bill Maxwell comes back into the picture. This is the last lunch we had with him a couple of months before he died, my friend Eric and I with him. And at his memorial service, we met his longtime secretary and all of us suffering the loss of this dear man. And we resolved to have lunch on the same day because we couldn't have that day empty. And so we set the date, and on March 20th, she was coming down 83rd Street, and we were happy to see her. We were coming from the other direction, and we arrived at the door of the restaurant, and there was a little sign that said, we regret to say we no longer serve lunch. But Bill came back to me. I thought that chapter had closed, but Bill came back to me in the week before we made the presentation to Newtown. And this is St. John the Divine when his memorial service was. And coming out into the brilliant September sun that I remember, we heard bells. And it was a very particular kind of bell. And I discovered at that moment that he had two stipulations for his memorial service: ponies and ice cream. How about that? So we heard ice cream trucks, and sure enough, we came out and into that side, if you know St. John the Divine, in the area next to it, that park next to it, there were two ice cream trucks and these ponies with kids laughing. It was the most life-affirming thing that we could hear. So I thought, wow, that's incredible. And I came into the office the next morning, and I said, I have it. I know what the presentation should be. And they said, what? And I said, ponies and ice cream. And it was like, what? And what I meant was, and what we understood immediately was that if we could offer a process that included as many people as possible and all the children. And we embarked upon that, and our presentation was ringed with these activities, all in the embrace of the children. And we have since, among the activities was this one, Sculpt a Brick. And we're doing this now with the kids still. It's absolutely wonderful. I wish I had time to share every single one of these activities with you. This little girl lighting up. And the importance of it was, and also the adults, of course, in the process, it was two things. One, that they realized that they themselves had something to give. Everyone wanted to help in some way. Everyone does, but they don't have the opportunity. We wanted to give everyone the opportunity to realize that they themselves had something to give. And secondly, the most important thing is it only has meaning when it's together. Only has meaning when it's together. So thank you very much. I'd like to close with the very first exercise that we did with the building committee. And I don't know if you're willing, this is kind of an experiment. I'd love for all of you to stand up. Now, I see the coffee cups, so we're going to be investing in the dry cleaners all across the Northeast. But if you could stand up, put whatever it is underneath, just very quickly do this. This was the very first exercise. God, you all look great. Jesus. Yeah, doesn't it feel good to stand up? So what we said quite simply was that all architecture relates to gravity, right? And we're all standing here experiencing gravity. What we don't realize is that there is a force that we have within us all the time that's going in another direction, or we'd fall down, right? So we feel that, and we feel it right now, all of us. We feel this weight. So what we're going to do is we're going to shift to this side. Not yet. No, you're anxious. We're going to shift to this side, and we're going to put all our weight on this foot, on that foot, and say to ourselves silently, me. Now, we're going to make that move without saying when to do it. I'm going to be watching you. We're all going to do it together. We have to be aware of everybody in the room. So we're going to do it. And we feel what we have to give. And now we're going to move back to the other side. We're going to put all our, not yet, all our weight back on the right-hand side. And we're going to say we aloud. We. God, that was beautiful. Thank you.